With so many people moving here to Tennessee from all over the country, today I wanted to do a video that sort of touched on what the legal aspects of real estate are here in Tennessee. The laws are different in every state, and I thought the best way to do that was to sit down with our in-house attorney, Griffin Dunham. Griffin is one of the owners of our sister title company, Momentum Title. He owns 3 different title companies. He's been an attorney for 22 years, and he's argued in front of the Supreme Court and won, right? Yes.
It's been a while, but yes.
It's been a while, but still, this is a guy to know. This is a guy we all go to here. And so welcome, Griffin. Thank you for doing this with me.
Appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. So we are going to move on to LLCs.
Okay.
Yeah. Super exciting. How does an LLC protect, and who should hold title as an LLC? We get this question a lot in real estate. As agents, should we have LLCs? I've had clients call and ask about LLCs, so I thought, I know a little bit. I have one, but...
Right. Well, 99% of the time, those who should be thinking about holding title with an LLC should be those who are investors, those who are going to use the property for business or rental purposes. And it's also important to try to take title as an LLC, just for the insurance policy that we talked about. LLCs are interesting. They're just like corporations in the sense that they provide protection to the ownership. So there's an LLC that has individual or corporate owners. And the reason that LLCs exist to protect the individual, it's inherent in the name, limited liability company. It's because in our society, from an economic standpoint, from a capitalistic standpoint, we want to encourage people to be entrepreneurs. And if we don't have protections in place for those who start businesses, then whatever the business does, if it falls back and exposes the individual owners to liability, it disincentivizes those from starting a new business. If we don't start a new business, then our economy is going to suffer. And so there's protection in place for those. The reason that LLCs are important for business and rental purposes is because as long as any claim arises from conduct that is in furtherance of the business activity, there is a veil that protects the individual owners from liability as a result of the business activity. So a lot to say, but really what it means is that if you have, let's use real estate. Let's say that you have either a retail center that you own and it's in an LLC, or if it's an individual home that you're trying to Airbnb and something happens on that property, God forbid a murder, a slip and fall, something where injury or damage has occurred to somebody. Well, that party can look to, of course, the insurance that is going to be part and parcel with the property itself. But what happens if there's a policy limit and the claim exceeds that limit? Then the individual owner or the LLC can be responsible for the damage in excess of the policy limits. And then in that situation, if it's a company, well, the good thing about that is that you can't go beyond what the value of the assets are against the LLC. You can't go against the individual who might have substantial assets. They're protected because the property is owned by the LLC. So there's a limit on how much of a claim would have to be paid out. And it's also, it is a barrier between liability of the business and the individual owner. So I always tell people, if you're going to rent out a property or if you're going to use it for business purposes, and there are going to be invitees or licensees that come upon the property that could be hurt by it, then it's a no-brainer. Always put it into an LLC. Each separate property into an LLC, not just one LLC that holds a bunch of different properties, because then if you think about what I just said, if all those properties collectively have a bunch of equity and there's a claim against the main company that holds all these different properties, well, there's a lot of equity to pay out a large claim. Whereas if you limit it to just single property LLCs, there's going to be a lesser amount of exposure to the other. There's not going to be any exposure to the other LLCs, and that one entity is only going to have exposure up to the value of the equity and all the assets.
Okay. No, I mean, that makes sense. And my investors in the past have done it that way. So that's
Always.
okay. Good to know. We won't get into the realtor part of having an LLC because that doesn't affect anybody watching probably, but maybe we can talk about that another time.
It doesn't affect, and it's interesting too, that it doesn't mean that you can't individually be sued, because if you perform an act, then you individually could be sued. But if the business is performing it, then that's where the individual owner is no longer liable. So if I'm a painter, if I have an LLC, if I'm a painter and I cause damage to a property, I'm the owner, I caused the damage, sure, I can be sued individually because I performed the action. The company did too, so the company could be liable also. But if an employee of mine caused the damage, well, I can't be sued individually because I didn't do anything except for own the business. The business would be owned. So I do think it's important for people to keep in mind that it doesn't protect you entirely. It just protects you to the extent that the business only has acted and that claim arises from an activity of the business.
Okay. Okay. Good to know. Next question. What's the difference between an LLC and a trust? And which is better for like each type of property owner versus like a big corporation or a mom and pop type investor?
That's going to always be specific to the transaction. You can never really say which one is better in every situation globally. You'd have to look at what the individual's needs are, what their wants are. The difference in LLC is it is a business entity with a structure that has been registered with the state in order to do business, and a trust is not. A trust is just the creation of this trust that has a trustee. The trustee administers the assets of the trust that are placed into it by a grantor. Both of those vehicles are intended to provide protection. They don't always provide the most protection, but they're intended to provide protection, or in the event of either a death, they're intended to limit the requirement or the need for probate. Nobody wants to be involved in probate if they don't have to be. So if people believe that they want to make it clear who the beneficiaries are for the specific property or for other assets, then a trust is probably the better direction that they'd want to go. You can have a last will and testament. You can have a trust set up. That's a separate segment on estate planning in general, where you look at the individual's needs in their lives and what's particular about their circumstances that's special, and decide what the best approach is to maximize the protection. With an LLC, it's a little bit different because it's agnostic to the proposition of heirs, and it's more focused on pursuing some business activity. So either operating a business out of the real estate, or two, using it for rental purposes, whether that's short term or long term. So different functions, different reasons for entering into each of those, but at the same time, they have the same goal in mind of maximizing the protection, either for the individuals who own the LLC or for the beneficiaries of an estate, like in a trust situation. And we even get into the next line of irrevocable trust versus revocable trust, and those are a different animal too. Bottom line is, if you think that there is an asset to protect, then it's good to speak with either an attorney who can handle estates to figure out if there is an estate planning vehicle that could help, or speak with a business formation attorney who can decide what's best, and then obviously always have to have your accountants involved too. So yeah.
With those exciting accountants involved.
Hey, they're worth every penny you pay.
They are. I agree. I have a really good one. So, okay. So next question.
Mm-hmm.
Can an LLC or a trust be set up during ownership, or do either need to be created at the time the property changes ownership? Like, is that somebody can go along and decide, hey, we already own this property, but we should probably have an LLC or some sort of protection? Can they do that along the way? Okay.
You can do it anytime. Only thing to keep in mind is that your title policy is only going to be good for the owner at the time that the vesting occurred, when the purchase occurred. So you have to check your title policy to determine whether or not, if you have a single member LLC and you're the sole member, whether or not that the transfer of ownership of the property into that LLC is going to void your policy. But in general, life situations happen all the time where people will quit claim property into an LLC or into a trust because it's part of a bigger global estate planning strategy. But the one thought people should keep in mind is, what does this do to my policy in place?
Okay. And so what's the cost associated with setting up an LLC versus trust? The trust is more, right?
It is. So I would say for a very basic trust, very basic, you can get a will, you can get a trust. There are packages. A lot of these attorneys will bundle them together. You're typically talking about $2,500 on the most straightforward end. And then I've seen them range up to $15,000, $20,000 for more complex estate planning where there are multiple holdings. You might have multi-jurisdictional taxation issues. So I would say in general, if your life is pretty simple and pretty straightforward, you're talking between $2,500 and $4,000 is what I would say.
For a trust.
For a trust.
Okay.
Yeah. LLC is easy. You and I could form an LLC right now at that counter over there in a matter of 15 minutes. And it's going to cost you, I think it's $300 plus it's based on the number of owners. So it goes up a little bit depending upon how many owners you have. Okay. But if you're a single member LLC, I think that the rate that you are going to pay is $300 plus. Some people decide to go to have an attorney do it. And most attorneys, they can do it so quickly that they should be charging less than $500 for that.
Okay. Okay. Still more expensive than Florida.
Is it?
Yes, Florida is $138 a year. So yeah, then I moved here, and I think it was one of your guys I spoke to.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was like, "Yeah, it's going to be a little bit more than Florida." Yeah.
Yeah. Now we have some benefits that Florida doesn't have, but yeah, that's just what it costs to file it.
Okay.
And then once you file it, then of course you have to register with the Department of Revenue, and there's more to be done, but that doesn't cost you anything. The filing fee itself is $300, and then an attorney would oftentimes charge, say, $500. You're talking about an hour's worth of their time because they just don't give you a information sheet questionnaire and you fill it out and then they do it for you. They want to make sure that you're aware of when do you want your fiscal year to begin. They want to go through the different questions about registered agent before and make you aware of what the complications could be and what the implications are of forming an LLC.
Okay, cool. Well, that was it for LLCs. Let's move on to fraud.
Oh,
Yeah.
the dreaded fraud.